They say the law is blind, impartial to the faces it judges. But what happens when the enforcers of that law forget the humanity of those they serve? In a quiet, tightly knit town, an act of humiliation and abuse would set the stage for an unthinkable transformation, not just for one family, but for an entire community. This is the story of Ava Johnson, a bright-eyed 13-year-old girl with dreams as vibrant as the notebooks she carried that day into Morton's Corner store. It's the story of Officer Franklin Harper, a man whose decades of service hid the cracks in his moral foundation. And it's the story of a mother's unyielding fight for justice, a rookie officer's crisis of conscience, and the rippling impact of a single moment captured on video. What began as a routine patrol for one officer and an afternoon errand for a teenager quickly spiraled into a clash of power, prejudice, and resilience. When a 20-second clip went viral, the entire nation turned its gaze toward this small town. Some would rise, others would fall, but all would be forced to confront the deep fractures in their lives and in the system they trusted. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed in the precinct's briefing room as Officer Franklin Harper adjusted his badge, its polished surface reflecting years of wear and authority. At 50, Harper had seen the town's ugliest moments, and he had shaped himself into the kind of officer who believed in one thing above all: discipline. "Remember," he said, addressing the room of fresh-faced officers before him, "we maintain order because the people trust us to do what's right. Without discipline, there's chaos." Rookie Officer Alex Matthews, still green behind the ears, nodded fervently. Harper's words carried weight, even if Matthews couldn't fully grasp their implications. Across town, Ava Johnson roamed the aisles of Morton's Corner store, her braided hair bouncing with each step. The school year was approaching, and Ava had promised herself that this year her notebooks would be perfect, a reflection of the honor roll student she was. She clutched a crisp $5 bill her mother had given her, glancing over the shelves for the spiral-bound notebook she had seen on TV. Behind the counter, Mr. Morton, the store's aging owner, eyed Ava suspiciously. To him, she wasn't a bright student or a doting daughter. She was just another troublemaker waiting to happen. His narrowed gaze followed her every move, his hand hovering over the counter phone. As Ava reached for a vibrant blue notebook, Morton's voice thundered across the store. "Hey! What did you just put in your backpack?" Startled, Ava froze, turning toward him. "Excuse me? I didn't. Don't you lie to me," Morton snapped, storming toward her. "I saw you take something. Empty your bag right now." Ava's heart pounded as tears welled up in her eyes. "I swear, I didn't take anything. Look, you can check my bag." But Morton had already reached for the phone, dialing the local precinct. "Get an officer down here," he barked. "We've got a shoplifter." Minutes later, the familiar screech of police sirens filled the air. Officer Franklin Harper stepped out of the patrol car, with Officer Matthews in tow. The moment Harper entered the store, he took in the scene: Ava, her backpack held open with trembling hands, and Morton, his face twisted with righteous indignation. "What seems to be the problem here?" Harper asked, though his tone suggested he had already decided the answer. "This one," Morton declared, jabbing a finger toward Ava, "thinks she can just walk in here and steal." "I didn't steal anything," Ava cried. "Please, you can check my bag." Harper's gaze turned cold. "Watch your tone, young lady. This is exactly the kind of attitude that gets kids like you into trouble." Matthews shifted uncomfortably behind Harper as the veteran officer dumped Ava's backpack onto the counter. Out spilled her school books, pencils, and a carefully packed lunch. No notebook, so no stolen goods. "Turn out your pockets," Harper ordered. Ava hesitated, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong." "That's it," Harper snapped, his patience wearing thin. Grabbing his handcuffs, he clamped them around Ava's thin wrists. "Maybe a trip to the station will teach you some respect." At the precinct, the Stark interrogation room offered no comfort. The cold metal of the chair pressed against Ava's back as Harper stood over her, flipping through an old manual he had dug from his desk. "According to station policy," he began, with the air of someone savoring his authority, "all detainees must undergo hygiene processing." "A hygiene processing?" Ava asked, confused. But Harper was already pulling an electric razor from the cabinet. The harsh buzz of the clippers drowned out her soft protests. "Standard procedure," he muttered, his voice mechanical, as he moved the razor across her scalp. Ava's hair, a source of her pride and identity, fell to the floor in clumps. "Don't you dare!" Ava's mother, Tamara Johnson, burst through the station doors, her face etched with fury and fear. "What are you doing to my daughter?" Harper didn't stop. "Your daughter was caught shoplifting," he said coldly. "She needs to learn about consequences." "She's 13, Tamara shouted, struggling against another officer holding her back. "This is abuse. She didn't steal anything." The clippers stopped. Harper stepped back, admiring his work. Ava's trembling hands reached up, touching her now bare scalp. "You're free to go," Harper said, unlocking the handcuffs. "Let this be a lesson." Tamara rushed to Ava, wrapping her arms around her sobbing daughter. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low but resolute. "You'll answer for this." Unbeknownst to Harper, Officer Matthews had recorded the entire incident on his phone. Back at his car, Matthews sat frozen, the weight of what he had just witnessed sinking in. He watched the video again, each second searing into his memory. "This isn't right," Matthews whispered to himself, his hands trembling. For the first time, the rookie officer began to question everything he thought he knew about the job, and about the man he had once idolized. Little did they know, the storm had only just begun. The silence of the precinct was deceptive. Outside, the world was changing faster than Officer Franklin Harper could comprehend. It started as a ripple, a video shared from one anonymous account. The clip of Harper shaving Ava Johnson's hair, paired with her mother's anguished cries, spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags like #Justice for Ava and #Police Accountability trended nationwide. The once quiet town became the epicenter of a storm it wasn't prepared to weather. Rookie Officer Alex Matthews sat in his cramped apartment, staring at his phone. The video he had recorded was now playing on every major news outlet. His anonymous email to several civil rights groups and journalists had triggered an outpouring of fury. Social media boiled over, with calls for Harper's resignation and an investigation into the police department. Matthews scrolled through the comments, a mix of outrage and heartbreak. How could anyone do this to a child? This is why we say the system is broken. This isn't just one bad cop. It's the entire culture. Each comment felt like a weight on Matthew's chest. He had joined the force to make a difference, but now he wondered if he'd already become complicit in the problem. Meanwhile, Ava Johnson's name became a rallying cry. The image of her tear-streaked face and shaved head was splashed across every platform. Protesters gathered outside the police station, their signs bold and unrelenting: "Justice for Ava," "End police abuse," and "Accountability now." Inside the station, Harper sat in the break room, scrolling through his own phone. Unlike Matthews, he didn't feel guilt, just annoyance. "People these days are too sensitive," he muttered to himself, tossing the phone onto the table. His colleagues avoided him. their conversations hushed and their glances wary. Even the ones who usually laughed at his jokes now kept their distance. For the first time in his career, Harper felt the ground beneath him begin to shift. As the protests grew louder, a figure emerged amidst the crowd. Jerome Parker, a seasoned civil rights lawyer with a reputation for taking on cases that others deemed impossible. Tall and composed, Parker exuded a quiet strength. He approached Tamara Johnson during one of the rallies, extending his hand. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, his voice steady, "I'm deeply sorry for what happened to your daughter. I'd like to help you fight this." Tamara studied him, her eyes still red from sleepless nights. "I don't want sympathy," she said, her voice firm. "I want justice." "And that's exactly what we'll get," Parker replied. Together they began organizing legal strategies, gathering statements from witnesses, and laying the groundwork for what would become a battle not just for Ava, but for systemic change. Back at the station, Harper dismissed the uproar with a shrug. "This is a witch hunt," he told Chief Malcolm Reeves, the man who had mentored him for decades. Reeves leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You need to tread carefully, Harper," Reeves said finally. "Internal Affairs is sniffing around, and this isn't the kind of case we can sweep under the rug." Harper's jaw tightened. "I followed procedure. That girl was disrespectful, and her mother's just stirring up trouble." Reeves said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. Harper left the office, his confidence shaken for the first time in years. While Harper clung to his defiance, Ava's world crumbled. At school, whispers followed her like shadows. "That's the girl from the video," someone muttered as she walked by. "She was probably stealing," another voice chimed in. Ava kept her head down, her hands clutching the strap of her backpack. She had started wearing scarves to cover her shaved head, but they couldn't hide the scars, both physical and emotional. Her favorite teacher, Miss Williams, noticed the change. "Ava," Miss Williams said gently one afternoon, "my door is always open if you want to talk." Ava nodded but didn't respond. How could she explain the humiliation, the nightmares, the way her peers looked at her, as if she were both a victim and a spectacle? At home, therapy sessions became a regular occurrence. Dr. Sarah Bennett, a kind woman with a calming presence, encouraged Ava to speak about her feelings, but Ava struggled to find the words. "I just want to forget," she whispered one day. "But I can't." As Ava grappled with her trauma, the protests outside the station intensified. People from neighboring towns joined in, swelling the crowd to hundreds. Tamara Johnson stood at the forefront, her voice steady even as threats began to pour in. "This isn't just about Ava," she told a reporter from a national news outlet. "It's about every child who's been failed by this system. It's about demanding better." Counter-protesters also appeared, holding signs that read, "Support our police," and "Stop the witch hunt." The tension in the town grew palpable. Lines were drawn, and neighbors found themselves on opposite sides of the divide. In the precinct, Harper felt the pressure mounting. Internal Affairs agents moved through the station, their presence unsettling. Files were reviewed, officers were questioned, and Harper found himself increasingly isolated. His usual bravado began to crack as rumors swirled about his impending suspension. For Rookie Matthews, the tension was unbearable. He knew he had done the right thing by leaking the video, but the weight of his secret grew heavier each day. In moments of doubt, he replayed Ava's cries in his mind, using them to steel his resolve. One evening, Matthews sat in his car outside the precinct, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He dialed Jerome Parker's office. "This is Officer Alex Matthews," he said. When Parker answered, "I need to talk." By the end of the week, the storm showed no signs of calming. Harper's once ironclad authority had eroded, and the department's reputation hung by a thread. Tamara and Jerome continued their fight, determined to expose the deeper rot within the system. At school, Ava sat in Ms. Williams' classroom, scribbling in a notebook. For the first time since the incident, she felt a spark of clarity. Her words flowed onto the page, raw and unfiltered, as she began to write about what had happened to her. Unbeknownst to Ava, her essay would soon find its way to a national platform, becoming a beacon of resilience and a catalyst for change. And as Officer Matthews prepared to reveal the department's darkest secrets, the battle for justice was only just beginning. The morning sun cast a pale light over the police precinct, but the atmosphere inside was anything but calm. The once respected Officer Franklin Harper was escorted through the narrow halls, his hands cuffed behind his back. The quiet clinking of the cuffs reverberated in the stark silence as his colleagues watched, their expressions a mix of pity, fear, and thinly veiled relief. This was no ordinary day at the precinct. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Internal affairs had moved swiftly. Harper was arrested on charges of misconduct and abuse of power, his public humiliation cemented by the protesters gathered outside. Chants of justice for Ava thundered through the air as Harper was loaded into the back of a patrol car. News cameras captured every angle, ensuring that the once authoritative officer became a symbol of the department's unraveling. Inside the patrol car, Harper sat in stunned silence. He had spent years wielding his badge as a symbol of power, but now, stripped of it, he felt exposed in a way he never thought possible. In the holding cell, Harper's bravado crumbled. As the metal bars closed behind him, he was left alone with his thoughts. For the first time, he began to feel the weight of his actions, not as a defender of order, but as a man who had caused irreparable harm. Across town, Tamara Johnson was far from silent. She stood at the center of a packed community meeting, flanked by Jerome Parker and several other local activists. The room buzzed with energy as people shared their stories of police misconduct, many of which had gone unheard until now. Tamara's voice was steady and resolute as she addressed the crowd. "This is not just about my daughter," she said, her words echoing through the room. "This is about every family who has been silenced, every child who has been treated as less than. It's time to hold them accountable." Jerome nodded beside her, taking notes and offering his legal expertise. Together, they began compiling testimonies, video evidence, and records of past complaints against Harper and his colleagues. Tamara, who had once been a grieving mother, now emerged as a powerful advocate for change. Meanwhile, Ava sat in her favorite corner of the school library, clutching a pen so tightly that her fingers ached. Ms. Williams had encouraged her to put her feelings into words, and for the first time, Ava felt compelled to share her truth. The words poured out of her, raw and unfiltered, filling page after page of her notebook. She wrote about the humiliation of that day in the store, the cold buzz of the clippers against her scalp, and the ache of knowing that so many people believed she deserved it. But she also wrote about her determination to rise above it, to make sure no other child would have to endure what she did. Weeks later, Ms. Williams submitted Ava's essay to a national youth writing competition. Ava was skeptical that her story would resonate beyond her small town, but Ms. Williams insisted. "Your voice matters, Ava," she said gently. "People need to hear this." While Ava found strength in her writing, Officer Alex Matthews struggled with his own guilt. His decision to leak the video had set everything into motion, but he knew it wasn't enough. Matthews had witnessed countless moments of misconduct during his time at the precinct, instances he had dismissed as part of the job. Now, He couldn't ignore them. One evening, Matthews sat in his car, outside Jerome Parker's office, his palms sweaty as he gripped the steering wheel. Finally, he mustered the courage to go inside. "Mr. Parker," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I have information about Officer Harper and others. I need to make this right." Parker studied the young officer for a moment before nodding. "This is a brave step, Officer Matthews," he said, "but it's only the beginning." As Matthews began sharing details about the department's culture, a troubling pattern emerged. Many of the incidents he described were tied to orders from Chief Malcolm Reeves, Harper's longtime mentor, and the man who had shaped most of the precinct's operations. Parker's team unearthed a chilling discovery: a special file maintained by Reeves. This file contained records of cases that had been quietly buried, evidence tampered with, complaints dismissed, and lives ruined. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that Harper was not the root of the problem, but a symptom of something far more insidious. Tamara's role as an advocate grew with each passing day. She organized rallies, met with community leaders, and even appeared on local news programs to share Ava's story. Her poise and determination resonated with viewers, transforming her into a symbol of resilience. But with visibility came danger. Tamara began receiving anonymous threats, emails warning her to stop her crusade. Letters with chilling messages slipped under her door. One evening, she returned home to find her car's tires sloshed, and the words "back off" spray-painted across the windshield. Ava noticed the tension in her mother's shoulders, but said nothing. She knew her mother well enough to understand that fear would not stop her. "We're not backing down," Tamara told Jerome during a late-night strategy session. "Not until we've exposed everything." As Tamara pushed forward, the town became increasingly divided. Protests outside the police station grew larger and louder, but so did the counter-protests. Supporters of the police argued that Harper's arrest was an overreach, that his actions were being blown out of proportion. At a tense town hall meeting, tempers flared. One man stood up, his voice shaking with anger. "My father was a cop," he said. "He gave his life protecting this town. And now, you want to tear down everything he stood for?" Tamara rose to respond, her tone measured. "We're not tearing anything down," she said. "We're building something better, something that serves everyone, not just a few." Her words were met with a mix of applause and jeers. The division was undeniable, but so was the growing momentum for change. One afternoon, Ava received a phone call that would change everything. A representative from the national writing competition informed her that her essay had won first place. Not only that, but she was invited to deliver a keynote speech at their annual conference. When Ms. Williams told her class about Ava's achievement, they erupted into applause. For the first time since the incident, Ava felt a glimmer of pride. Her essay was published in a national magazine, sparking conversations across the country. Readers were moved by her honesty and courage, and her words became a rallying cry for those fighting for justice. As Tamara, Jerome, and Matthews prepared for the next phase of their fight, they knew the stakes were only growing. The evidence against Chief Reeves was mounting, but so were the obstacles. Threats against Tamara's family escalated, and whispers of retaliation began to circulate within the precinct. In her room, Ava stared at the framed copy of her essay on the wall. She was proud of what she had accomplished, but she knew the journey was far from over. Her story was just one of many, and the fight for justice would require every ounce of strength she had. The seeds of change had been planted, but the road ahead would test them all. The dimly lit conference room buzzed with tension. Jerome Parker spread a series of files across the table, each labeled with names, dates, and case numbers. Officer Alex Matthews sat stiffly in his chair, his fingers drumming anxiously against the armrest. Tamara Johnson leaned forward, her sharp gaze scanning the documents. The room felt heavy with purpose. "This," Jerome began, pointing to a file marked Special Cases, Chief Reeves, "is the tip of the iceberg. These files outline years of systemic abuse, buried complaints, and tampered evidence. Reeves didn't just enable corruption. He orchestrated it." Matthews shifted in his seat. "Harper was following orders," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We all were, in one way or another." Tamara glanced at the rookie officer. "But you chose to speak up," she said firmly. "That counts for something." Jerome added, "The question is, how deep are you willing to go? Because exposing Reeves means taking on the entire system." Matthews nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes." With Matthews' testimony and the files Jerome uncovered, they began to piece together a narrative that exposed the department's darkest secrets. Harper's misconduct wasn't isolated. It was part of a well-oiled machine designed to protect the powerful and exploit the vulnerable. Tamara had become a relentless force in the fight for justice. She traveled to neighboring towns, speaking at churches, schools, and community centers, rallying support for systemic reform. Her voice was unwavering as she recounted Ava's story, connecting it to a larger pattern of abuse and discrimination. "We're not just fighting for Ava," Tamara told a packed audience at a town hall meeting. "We're fighting for every child, every family, and every community that's been silenced by fear." The crowd erupted in applause, their collective energy fueling her determination. Tamara's growing influence brought new allies to their cause: local pastors, small business owners, and even a retired judge who shared his own experiences of systemic bias. But with visibility came danger. Tamara's phone buzzed incessantly, with anonymous threats, each more menacing than the last. She refused to let fear deter her, but the weight of the fight began to take its toll. At night, Tamara found herself staring at Ava as she slept, her daughter's face serene, yet haunted by the trauma she had endured. "I'll protect you," Tamara whispered, "no matter what." While Tamara led the charge, Ava found herself navigating uncharted territory. At school, whispers still followed her, but she no longer shrank from them. Instead, she began to reclaim her voice, starting with a small peer support group for students who had experienced discrimination. The group met in a quiet corner of the library, their voices low, but their resolve strong. Ava shared her story, her words resonating with classmates who had faced their own battles. Together, they brainstormed ways to create change within their school, from hosting discussions to starting an anonymous reporting system for bullying and discrimination. Ms. Williams, who had been Ava's unwavering ally, watched with pride as her student blossomed into a leader. "You're turning pain into power," she told Ava after one particularly moving group session. Ava smiled, the weight of her experiences lightened by the supports of those around her. One evening, Tamara returned home to find her living room window shattered. A spray-painted message on the wall read, "Stop or else." She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The scene felt surreal, a stark reminder of the danger they faced. Ava found her mother sitting on the couch, staring at the broken glass. "Mom?" she asked hesitantly. Tamara turned to her daughter, her expression steely. "We're not backing down." The police report filed that night went nowhere. It was clear that their fight was making waves, and not everyone wanted change. Outside the police station, the protests grew larger and louder, signs reading "Justice for Ava" and "End Police Brutality" clashed with others that read, "Support our officers," and "Back the Blue." The tension in the air was palpable, dividing neighbors, friends, and even families. Tamara stood at the forefront of the movement, her voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't about tearing anyone down," she declared at a rally. "It's about building a system that serves and protects everyone." But counter-protesters weren't convinced. A man with a bullhorn shouted, "You're turning this town into a circus. We support our police." Tamara locked eyes with him. "Then you should want better from them," she countered. "True support means holding them accountable." Her words drew cheers from her supporters, but the divide in the community remained stark. Back in the precinct, internal affairs agents pored over the files provided by Matthews. What they uncovered was staggering. A special file, maintained by Chief Reeves, containing evidence of misconduct that had been systematically buried. The file detailed case after case where complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, and evidence tampering had been swept under the rug. Matthews' testimony corroborated the documents, painting a damning picture of a department that had long operated above the law. When the findings were leaked to the press, the town erupted. Headlines screamed of corruption at the highest levels, and calls for Reeves' resignation grew deafening. Amid the chaos, Ava received an email that would change everything. Her essay had been picked up by a national magazine, and she was invited to share her story on a prominent news show. Tamara hesitated. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Ava nodded, her voice steady. "People need to know the truth." On live television, Ava recounted her experience with a poise that belied her age. "What happened to me wasn't just about one officer," she said. "It's about a system that sees kids like me as threats instead of people." Her words struck a chord, sparking conversations across the country. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Number Justice for Ava and Number Reform Now, amplifying her voice far beyond their small town. As Tamara, Ava, and Jerome prepared for the next phase of their fight, they knew the road ahead would be treacherous. The threats against them escalated, and the opposition grew more organized. But so did their resolve. In her room, Ava pinned a copy of her essay to the wall, alongside a picture of her father, who had passed away years before. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. At the precinct, Chief Reeves watched the growing movement with a mixture of anger and fear. His carefully constructed empire was beginning to crumble, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the spotlight turned squarely onto him. The revelation about Chief Malcolm Reeves hit the town like a thunderclap. The internal affairs investigation had exposed a web of corruption spanning more than a decade. Evidence of embezzlement, wrongful convictions, and tampered records pointed directly to Reeves, whose name was now synonymous with scandal. At a hastily called press conference, Reeves stood at the podium, his usually commanding presence faltering under the weight of the allegations. "These claims are baseless," he declared, his voice tinged with desperation. "I've dedicated my life to this community, and I will fight these lies." But the reporters weren't buying it. They fired questions about the special file, missing evidence, and coerced testimonies. Reeves deflected with practiced ease, but his facade was cracking. Behind closed doors, Reeves summoned his inner circle. "We need to control this narrative," he barked, slamming his fist on the table. "Find something, anything, that discredits Tamara Johnson, Jerome Parker, and that rookie Matthews." His allies exchanged uneasy glances. The walls were closing in, and even Reeves could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The community center was packed to capacity, the air buzzing with anticipation. At the front of the room stood Ava Johnson, her small frame belying the strength of her presence. She clutched a microphone, her hands trembling slightly as she looked out at the sea of faces. 6 months ago, she began, her voice quavering but growing stronger with each word. I was just a regular kid. I went to school, hung out with my friends, and dreamed about my future. Then, one day, someone decided that I didn't deserve to be treated like a person, that I was just another statistic. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on Ava. Her mother, Tamara, watched from the front row, tears brimming in her eyes. But I'm not a statistic, Ava continued, her voice steady now. I'm a human being, and I'm standing here today because I refuse to let fear or hate define me. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound filling the room like a wave. Ava's words resonated far beyond the community center, spreading across social media platforms within hours. Her speech became a rallying cry, inspiring others to share their own stories of injustice. In his stark prison cell, Franklin Harper stared at the blank notebook in front of him. The clamor of the day's activities had faded, leaving behind a heavy silence. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking slightly, and began to write. Dear Ava, he started, then paused. The words felt inadequate, but he pushed forward. I've spent the past months reflecting on what I did to you. No excuse can justify my actions. I was wrong. I let my authority blind me to your humanity, and for that, I am deeply sorry. As Harper wrote, memories of that day at the station flooded back. Ava's tear-streaked face, Tamara's fiery determination, and Matthew's quiet unease. He had been so certain he was doing his job, upholding order. Now he saw the truth. He had been upholding a broken system. The act of writing felt both cathartic and painful, each word a small step toward acknowledging his failures. Harper folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Tamara Johnson was a force to be reckoned with. Despite the mounting threats against her, she continued to lead the charge for systemic reform. At every rally, town hall meeting, and media interview, her voice rang clear and unwavering. This isn't just about one officer or one case, she told a crowd gathered outside the state capitol. This is about dismantling a culture of silence and complicity that has allowed injustice to thrive for far too long. Her words galvanized the audience, many of whom had been hesitant to speak out. One by one, people came forward to share their own experiences, parents whose children had been profiled, workers who had been mistreated, and even former officers who admitted to being complicit in the system. Jerome Parker watched from the sidelines, his respect for Tamara growing with each passing day. She's a natural leader, he said to Matthews, who had joined the rally despite his discomfort with public speaking. Matthews nodded. She's not just fighting for Ava, she's fighting for all of us. As the movement gained momentum, the town became a battleground of ideologies. Protesters advocating for police reform clashed with counter-protesters who insisted on supporting law enforcement. The tension reached a boiling point when a group of counter-protesters attempted to disrupt a peaceful rally, leading to a standoff that nearly turned violent. Tamara stepped between the two groups, her voice cutting through the chaos. We're not here to fight each other, she said firmly. We're here to fight for a better future. For all of us. Her words diffused the tension, but the divide remained. The town was at a crossroads, and the path forward was anything but clear. A week after her speech, Ava's essay was published in a national magazine. Titled, What Justice Means to Me, it was a raw and powerful account of her journey from victim to advocate. The essay struck a chord, quickly going viral and sparking conversations across the country. I never asked to be an activist, Ava wrote. But when injustice knocks on your door, you have a choice. stay silent, or speak up. I chose to speak. Messages of support poured in from all corners of the nation. Ava was invited to speak at schools, conferences, and even a televised town hall. Her story became a beacon of hope for others, proof that one voice could spark change. As the movement continued to grow, so did the threats against Tamara and Ava. Late one night, Tamara received an anonymous email with the subject line, "Last warning." The message read, "Drop the case, or you'll regret it." Tamara's hands trembled as she read the words, but she quickly steeled herself. She forwarded the email to Jerome and Matthews, adding only one line, "We're not stopping." Meanwhile, in his cell, Harper received news of Reeves's impending arrest. The knowledge filled him with a mix of relief and dread. He had started to understand the depth of the corruption he had been a part of, but he also knew that exposing Reeves would come at a cost. And in the quiet moments before sleep, Ava sat at her desk, penning another essay. Her words flowed with purpose, each sentence a step toward healing and change. But as she wrote, she couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The day Chief Malcolm Reeves was arrested, the town was eerily quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from peace, but one that crackled with anticipation. A convoy of black SUVs rolled up to the police station, their lights flashing, but sirens muted. Officers and civilians alike froze as two agents from Internal Affairs stepped out. Inside his office, Reeves was pacing. He had heard the whispers, but had convinced himself he was untouchable. When the agents entered, his jaw tightened. "Chief Reeves," one of them said, holding up a badge, "you're under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power." Reeves let out a bitter laugh. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he sneered. "I've served this town for over 25 years. And in those 25 years, you've done more harm than good," the agent replied coldly. Reeves tried to maintain his composure as they cuffed him, but his hands trembled. As they escorted him out, officers who once followed his every order now avoided his gaze. Outside, a crowd had gathered, including Tamara Johnson and Jerome Parker. They stood at the front, their faces a mixture of satisfaction and determination. "This is just the beginning," Tamara whispered to Jerome. "The real fight starts now." Franklin Harper sat in a stark, brightly lit room, the hum of a recorder the only sound. Across from him sat agents from Internal Affairs, their expressions neutral, but their pens poised. "I'll tell you everything," Harper said, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "But I want to make one thing clear. I'm not doing this to save myself. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Over the next 3 hours, Harper recounted a decade's worth of misconduct, orchestrated by Reeves. He detailed cases where evidence had been tampered with, witnesses intimidated, and innocent people falsely convicted. "And the Thompson case?" one agent asked. Harper hesitated, the memory heavy on his conscience. "Reeves ordered me to lose the body cam footage," he admitted. "Said it would complicate things." The agents exchanged glances, their pens moving furiously. Harper's testimony painted a damning picture of a department built on lies and fear. When it was over, Harper leaned back, feeling both relieved and exposed. He knew his words would further alienate him, but he also knew they were necessary. At Jefferson Middle School, the cafeteria buzzed with chatter. Ava Johnson sat at a table, surrounded by friends, a rare smile on her face. In her hands was a letter bearing the crest of the prestigious Riverside Academy. "I can't believe it," Ava said, her voice filled with disbelief. "A full scholarship. It's everything I've ever wanted." Her best friend Maria grinned. "You deserve it, Ava. After everything, you deserve this." But beneath her excitement, Ava felt a pang of hesitation. Riverside Academy was 3 hours away, far from her community, her mother, and the movement they had built together. That evening, she sat with Tamara at the kitchen table, the letter between them. "What if I'm needed here?" Ava asked, her voice small. "What if I'm running away?" Tamara reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "You're not running away, baby. You're growing. And everything we fought for will still be here, waiting for you." The threats against Tamara escalated after Reeves's arrest. Late one night, she found a package on her doorstep. Inside was a burned copy of her family photo and a note. "Drop it, or you'll regret it." Her hands shook as she called Jerome, who arrived minutes later. "This is serious, Tamara," he said, his voice low. "We need to involve the state investigators." "I'm not backing down," she replied, her jaw set. "They can threaten me all they want, but I won't stop." Jerome nodded. "Then we'll increase security. You're too important to lose." Despite the fear, Tamara continued to lead rallies, organize meetings, and push for reform. At one event, she stood before a crowd holding candles, their flames flickering against the night sky. "They want us to be afraid," she said, her voice strong. "But we are stronger than their threats. Together, we are unstoppable." The crowd erupted in applause, their determination mirroring her own. In a small meeting room at the community center, a group of activists and police officers sat in a circle. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. This was the first official dialogue between law enforcement and the community since the protests began. Officer Alex Matthews, now a vocal advocate for reform, broke the silence. "I know trust has been broken," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "but I'm here to listen and to learn." Tamara watched as residents shared their stories of being profiled, mistreated, and ignored. Some officers bristled, but Matthews leaned in, taking notes and nodding. "Change starts with conversations like this," Tamara said, addressing the group. "It's not easy, but it's necessary." By the end of the meeting, there were no easy solutions, but there was progress. A second meeting was scheduled, and for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. As the chapter drew to a close, the weight of the fight ahead became clear. Ava stood in her room, packing for Riverside Academy. Her movements were slow, her emotions conflicted. On her desk sat an unfinished letter to Franklin Harper. "Dear Mr. Harper," she had written, "I received your letter. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I want you to know I see the effort you're making." Meanwhile, Tamara sat in her office, reviewing a draft of the Police Accountability and Reform Act. The legislation was gaining traction, but the opposition was fierce, and in his cell, Harper stared at the letter Ava had sent back to him. It was brief but powerful. "Change is a journey. I hope you keep walking it." The stage was set for the next chapter of their story, a story of resilience, redemption, and the relentless pursuit of justice. In the dim light of his prison cell, Franklin Harper sat hunched over a small desk, a blank sheet of paper before him. The words he needed to write had weighed heavily on his mind for weeks. He picked up the pen, hesitated, and began to write. "Dear Ava," he started, his handwriting shaky. "I've thought about what I did to you every day since it happened. There's no excuse for my actions, no justification for the harm I caused. I didn't just fail as a police officer. I failed as a human being." He paused, his thoughts racing. How could he possibly express the depth of his remorse? He continued, pouring his heart onto the page. "I see now that I let power and prejudice blind me. I see your courage and strength, and it humbles me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am committed to making amends, not just for what I did to you, but for all the harm I caused during my career." When he finished, Franklin folded the letter carefully and handed it to Jerome Parker, who had agreed to deliver it. "Make sure she knows I mean every word," Franklin said, his voice heavy with emotion. The letter arrived at Ava Johnson's home on a rainy afternoon. She sat on the living room couch, staring at the envelope in her hands. Her mother, Tamara, sat nearby, silently offering support. "You don't have to read it if you're not ready," Tamara said gently. Ava shook her head. "I need to." She opened the envelope and began reading. As she absorbed Franklin's words, a mix of emotions washed over her: anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of understanding. She set the letter down and looked at her mother. "How do you forgive someone who's done something so awful?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. Tamara placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. But it's your choice, Ava. You take your time." Over the next few days, Ava wrestled with her feelings. She spoke to her therapist, who encouraged her to write down her thoughts. In her journal, Ava wrote, "Forgiveness doesn't mean letting go of accountability. It means choosing to move forward." Meanwhile, Tamara Johnson was making strides in her fight for justice. The Police Accountability and Reform Act, which she had worked tirelessly on with Jerome Parker and other advocates, was nearing a critical vote in the state legislature. On the day of the hearing, Tamara stood before a packed room, her heart pounding. She spoke with conviction, detailing the systemic issues that had led to her daughter's trauma and the need for change. "This isn't just about my daughter," Tamara said, her voice unwavering. "It's about every child, every family, every community that has suffered because of a broken system. We have the power to fix it. Let's not waste this opportunity." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Lawmakers nodded in agreement, and for the first time, Tamara felt a surge of hope. 2 weeks later, the act passed. The victory was monumental, but Tamara knew it was only the beginning. "We've taken a big step forward," she told a group of supporters, "but the journey isn't over." With new leadership in the police department, changes began to take shape. Officers underwent mandatory bias training and participated in community engagement programs. A civilian oversight board was established, ensuring transparency and accountability. At the newly renamed David Johnson Community Center, residents gathered for a town hall meeting. Officers and community members sat side by side, sharing stories and ideas for rebuilding trust. "I used to fear the police," one resident said, "but seeing these changes gives me hope." Officer Alex Matthews, now a vocal advocate for reform, stood up to address the crowd. "Change isn't easy, and we've made mistakes, but we're committed to doing better. Your voices matter, and we're here to listen." The meeting ended with a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time in years, the community felt united. Late one evening, Ava sat at her desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. In front of her was Franklin Harper's letter. She picked up a pen and began to write. "Dear Mr. Harper," she wrote, "I received your letter, and I appreciate your honesty. I can see you're trying to change, and that means something. But forgiveness isn't easy. I'm still working through my feelings, and I don't know if I'm ready to forgive. What I do know is that your actions have taught me the importance of accountability and the power of using my voice." Ava folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. She felt a sense of closure, but also a readiness for the next step. She turned to her mother. "Mom," Ava said, I want to meet him. Tamara's eyes widened. Are you sure? Ava nodded. It's something I need to do. For myself. In his cell, Franklin sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The letter from Ava had arrived earlier that day, and he had read it over and over again. Her words echoed in his mind. Your actions have taught me the importance of accountability. For the first time in months, Franklin felt a spark of hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was determined to keep walking the path of redemption. Back at the Johnson home, Ava sat with her mother, discussing the details of the meeting. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Ava knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the scared, powerless girl she had been. She was a fighter, a leader, and a beacon of hope for her community. As the chapter closed, the stage was set for a powerful confrontation, one that would test both Ava's courage and Franklin's resolve. The morning was brisk, the air carrying a quiet tension, as Ava and Tamara approached the prison gates. The gray building loomed before them, a stark reminder of the pain and the lessons that had brought them here. Ava clutched the letter she had written to Franklin Harper, her fingers trembling slightly. You don't have to do this, Tamara said, her voice soft but firm. I know, Ava replied, her tone resolute. But I want to. The guard led them through the sterile hallways, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing in the silence. In the visiting room, Franklin Harper sat at a small metal table, his shoulders slumped, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked older, wearier, a shadow of the man who had once commanded respect and fear. When Ava entered, Franklin stood, his movements hesitant. Ava, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Harper, Ava replied, her tone steady. She sat across from him, placing her letter on the table between them. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Ava spoke, her words measured but powerful. You humiliated me, she said. You made me feel like I was nothing. And for a long time, I let that define me. But not anymore. Franklin's eyes glistened as he nodded. I know I hurt you, he said, his voice trembling. I've thought about that day every single moment since. There's no excuse for what I did. I was wrong. Ava studied him, searching his face for sincerity. Do you really understand the damage you caused? Not just to me, but to everyone who trusted the system you were supposed to uphold? Franklin took a deep breath. I do now, and I'm trying to make it right, even if I know I can never undo the harm. Their conversation stretched on, raw and emotional. Ava asked questions she had been holding on to for months, and Franklin answered each one with unflinching honesty. By the end, Ava felt a weight lifting, not because she forgave him entirely, but because she had reclaimed her voice and her power. I'm not ready to forgive you, Ava said, as she stood to leave. But I'm ready to move forward, and I hope you keep doing the work to prove you've changed. Franklin nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you for giving me the chance to say this. You're stronger than I ever was. The meeting left Ava feeling a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and an unexpected sense of closure. She channeled these feelings into her advocacy work, speaking at rallies and schools about her experience and the importance of standing up for justice. At one event, Ava stood before a crowd of hundreds, her voice clear and unwavering. We all have the power to make a difference, she said. Change doesn't come easy, but it starts with each of us choosing to do what's right, even when it's hard. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring others to share their own stories. Ava's leadership began to take shape, and she realized that her journey wasn't just about healing. It was about helping others find their strength. Back in the prison, Franklin Harper found purpose in the restorative justice program. He began mentoring younger inmates, teaching them about accountability and the importance of making amends. During one session, a young man named Marcus spoke about his own struggles with anger and resentment. "I don't know how to let go of the hate," Marcus admitted. Franklin nodded, his expression somber. "I used to think strength meant control, that it meant never admitting you were wrong. But real strength is facing your mistakes and choosing to be better." The program became a turning point for Franklin. He saw the impact of his words on others and felt a sense of redemption, not for himself, but for the lives he had affected. Meanwhile, Tamara Johnson began drafting her memoir. She spent long nights at her desk, recounting every detail of their journey. Ava's resilience, the community's transformation, and the fight for justice that had become her life's work. "This story isn't just ours," Tamara wrote. "It belongs to every person who has ever faced injustice and dared to demand better." Her writing became a form of healing, a way to process the pain and celebrate the progress they had made. Tamara envisioned the memoir as a tool for education and change, hoping it would inspire others to take action. As the reforms Tamara fought for began to take effect, tangible changes emerged. Police officers underwent bias training, and community oversight boards ensured greater accountability. The town started to heal, though the scars of the past remained a reminder of the work still to be done. Ava decided to start a youth initiative, bringing together teens and law enforcement to foster dialogue and understanding. "If we want real change," she told her peers, "we have to start with the next generation." Her efforts caught the attention of national organizations, and Ava was invited to speak at conferences and summits. Each opportunity strengthened her resolve to make a lasting impact. One evening, as Ava prepared for her move to the academy, she found herself reflecting on the journey so far. She sat at her desk, writing another letter, not to Franklin Harper, but to herself. "Dear Ava," she began, "you've been through more than most people your age, but you've come out stronger. You've found your voice, and you're using it to make a difference. Never forget where you came from, and never stop fighting for what's right." She folded the letter and placed it in her journal. As she looked out her bedroom window at the town she had grown up in, Ava felt a sense of hope for the future, not just for herself, but for the community she loved. The early morning light filtered through the state capitol's grand windows, casting a golden glow on the Pequea Legislative Chamber. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as lawmakers prepared to vote on the Police Accountability and Reform Act. Tamara Johnson stood quietly at the back of the room, flanked by community leaders and activists who had become her second family. Her heart pounded as the roll call began. "We owe this moment to the tireless efforts of people like Tamara Johnson," one senator declared during the final debate. "This bill isn't just about reforming policies, it's about rebuilding trust." Tamara felt tears prick her eyes as the final vote was cast. The bill passed. Applause erupted in the chamber, and Tamara embraced Jerome Parker, who had been instrumental in drafting the legislation. The fight had been grueling, but this was a victory, a step toward the justice her family and countless others deserved. Back in town, the impact of the reforms was immediate. Newly appointed Police Chief Sarah Martinez, a woman with a strong background in community relations, implemented sweeping changes. Officers now attended monthly bias training sessions and participated in community outreach programs. A civilian oversight board, composed of diverse town residents, reviewed all use of force cases, ensuring transparency and accountability. One evening, Tamara attended a meeting of the oversight board. Seated across the table was a young officer who had joined the force after the department's overhaul. "We're here to listen and to learn," the officer said, his voice steady but humble. Tamara nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the future. The town itself began to heal in small but significant ways. Murals celebrating unity and justice adorned once neglected walls. Local businesses displayed signs reading, "We support change," signaling solidarity with the movement. At the David Johnson Community Center, named after Tamara's late husband, neighbors gathered for workshops, discussions, and cultural events. At Jefferson Middle School, Ava Johnson's presence had transformed into something powerful. No longer the subject of whispers and stares, she was now a respected leader among her peers. Her youth initiative, Voices United, organized dialogues between students and local police officers. During one session, Ava stood before a group of students and officers, her voice steady. "We're here to listen to each other," she said. "Change starts with understanding, and understanding starts with honest conversations." The discussions weren't always easy. At one meeting, a student named Carlos voiced his fears about racial profiling, while Officer Daniels, a veteran on the force, admitted the department's past failures. Despite the tension, there was progress, a newfound willingness to bridge divides. Meanwhile, in a courthouse downtown, the trial of Chief Malcolm Reeves captivated the nation. Evidence of systemic corruption, including embezzlement, falsified records, and years of unchecked misconduct, painted a damning picture. Witness after witness testified against Reeves, including Franklin Harper, whose testimony was both pivotal and harrowing. "When I first joined the force, I believed in the badge," Franklin said from the stand. "But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what it stood for. Chief Reeves encouraged us to cut corners, to look the other way. And I did. For that, I am deeply sorry." The gallery was silent as Franklin stepped down, his face etched with remorse. In the front row, Tamara and Ava sat side by side, their presence a reminder of the lives affected by Reeves's actions. When the verdict was read, guilty on all charges, a sense of closure swept through the courtroom. Outside, reporters swarmed Tamara for a statement. "This is a victory," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But it's not the end of the fight. Real change takes time and persistence. We're just getting started." In the months following the trial, Tamara and Ava found moments of joy and normalcy amidst their advocacy work. One sunny afternoon, they planted a small garden behind the community center. As they worked side by side, Tamara said, "It feels good to create something, doesn't it?" Ava smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "Yeah, it does. Like we're building something that will last." Their bond, tested and strengthened by their shared journey, was a source of comfort and strength. Tamara often marveled at Ava's resilience and wisdom, qualities that seemed to grow with each passing day. As summer approached, Ava received her official acceptance letter to the prestigious Riverside Academy, a scholarship-funded opportunity that symbolized both her achievements and her community's support. The night before her departure, the town held a farewell celebration at the community center. Friends, teachers, and neighbors gathered to honor Ava's contributions. "Ava, you've taught us all what it means to be brave," Ms. Williams said, presenting Ava with a handcrafted journal. "Keep writing your story. It's one the world needs to hear." When Ava took the stage to give her farewell speech, she looked out at the sea of familiar faces. "This isn't goodbye," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "It's a new chapter. Everything I've learned here, everything we've built together, I'll carry with me. And I promise to make you proud." The crowd erupted into applause, and Tamara, standing at the back, wiped away tears. Her daughter was ready to soar, and while the thought of her leaving was bittersweet, Tamara knew Ava's future was bright. Late that night, as Ava packed the last of her belongings, She found a letter tucked into her suitcase. It was from Tamara. "My dearest Ava," it began, "you've shown me the true meaning of courage. As you step into this new chapter, know that you carry the love and pride of this entire community. Never doubt your strength and never stop fighting for what's right." Ava clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She glanced out the window, where the lights of the community center twinkled in the distance. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready to take the next step. The morning of Ava's departure dawned with a bittersweet clarity. The community center, decorated with streamers and banners, buzzed with anticipation. A large sign at the entrance read, "We love you, Ava. Keep shining." Tamara stood near the stage, greeting guests with her warm but slightly nervous smile. Ava had spent the morning at home, packing and repacking her suitcase, her emotions swirling between excitement and apprehension. By the time she arrived at the celebration, the room was filled with friends, neighbors, and supporters who had gathered to bid her farewell. Ms. Williams took the microphone first, her voice steady but full of pride. "Ava Johnson is more than just a student," she said, glancing fondly at Ava. "She's a symbol of resilience, a young woman who turned her pain into power. We are so proud of her." The crowd erupted into applause as Ava stepped onto the stage. She took a moment to scan the room, her eyes meeting familiar faces that had stood by her through the darkest times. With a deep breath, she began her speech. "When this journey started, I was just a scared girl who thought her voice didn't matter," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But you all showed me that one voice can spark a movement, and a community can change the world." Her words carried a sincerity that silenced the room. As Ava continued, her confidence grew. "I'm leaving for Riverside Academy tomorrow, but I'm not leaving behind the lessons I've learned here. This community is my foundation, my heart. I promise to carry that with me." Tears streamed down Tamara's face as the crowd gave Ava a standing ovation. She stepped forward, embracing her daughter tightly as camera flashes lit up the moment. It was a farewell not just for Ava, but for the chapter of their lives they were closing. Later that evening, the house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of floorboards as Tamara moved about, checking Ava's luggage one last time. She paused by the window, gazing out at the now empty streets, still lit by the glow of porch lights. Her thoughts drifted to everything they had been through. The humiliation at the police station, the protests, the threats. They had faced the worst and emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as a family and a community. Tamara sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The blank page of her memoir awaited her, the cursor blinking steadily. She began typing, "This isn't just our story. It's the story of a community that refused to stay silent. It's about justice, resilience, and the enduring power of hope." She stopped to read over the words, a small smile tugging at her lips. This was how she would honor their journey, by sharing it with the world. In a modest office at the David Johnson Community Center, Franklin Harper sat across from the board members of a newly formed scholarship program. The initiative, funded by his police pension, aimed to provide opportunities for marginalized youth. "I want the first scholarship to go to Ava Johnson," Harper said firmly, his voice steady. The board members exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. Harper had come a long way since his arrest. Months of restorative justice sessions had transformed his understanding of his past actions. He now worked with at-risk youth at the community center, sharing his story as a cautionary tale and a testament to the possibility of change. One afternoon, as Harper guided a young boy through a math problem, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Ava standing in the doorway, dressed in her Riverside Academy blazer. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Ava stepped forward, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking. "Thank you for what you're doing," she said, her tone calm but firm. "It won't erase what happened, but it matters." Harper nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the least I can do." The exchange was brief, but it carried a weight of understanding. Ava's acknowledgement marked a small but significant step in Harper's journey toward redemption. The town continued its transformation under the guidance of Chief Sarah Martinez. One of her first initiatives was a joint police-citizen event held at the community park. Officers played basketball with local teens, while others helped serve food at the barbecue stands. Tamara stood near the pavilion, watching the interactions with cautious optimism. She was approached by Officer Alex Matthews, the rookie who had recorded Ava's incident. "Miss Johnson," Matthews began, his voice tentative, "I wanted to thank you. Your fight for justice made me realize I needed to take responsibility for my role in the department." Tamara studied him for a moment before nodding. "It takes courage to admit your mistakes, Officer Matthews. Use that courage to do better." As the event continued, Tamara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The town was far from perfect, but for the first time in years, it felt like they were moving in the right direction. At the Riverside Academy, Ava settled into her dorm room, unpacking her belongings with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Her roommate, a bubbly girl named Mia, chatted animatedly about their upcoming classes and campus events. Ava smiled politely, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She opened her journal, flipping to the first blank page, and began writing, "Dear Mom, today was my first day at Riverside Academy. It feels strange to be so far from home, but I know I'm here for a reason. Everything we've been through has prepared me for this. I promise to make you proud." Later that week, Ava attended her first debate club meeting. As she spoke passionately about social justice issues, her voice carried the conviction of someone who had lived the fight. Her peers listened intently, and by the end of the meeting, Ava had already begun to establish herself as a leader. Back in her hometown, Tamara received an email from Ava with an attachment titled "Speech for National Summit." As she read through her daughter's words, she was struck by Ava's growth. Justice isn't just about holding people accountable. It's about creating systems that uplift and protect everyone equally. It's about ensuring that no one has to endure what I did. Together, we can build a better future. Tamara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Ava was no longer just a survivor. She was a beacon of hope, a voice for change, and a force to be reckoned with. The sprawling campus of Riverside Academy bustled with activity as Ava settled into her second semester. The Gothic architecture of the school's buildings seemed to whisper stories of generations past, but Ava was determined to make her mark in the present. In the student union, she stood before a crowd of her peers at a student-organized panel on systemic reform. The audience, a mix of eager students and attentive professors, watched as Ava addressed them with a mix of grace and fire. "When I was 13, my dignity was stripped away in a single act of prejudice," she began, her voice steady. "But what they didn't know was that they gave me a voice stronger than any attempt to silence me." Her words carried the weight of lived experience, and the room fell silent. As she spoke of community unity and accountability, Ava's confidence radiated, inspiring not just her peers, but also the faculty members who would later invite her to lead discussions at national conferences. In her downtime, Ava joined the Academy's Social Justice Coalition. The group focused on youth outreach and reform initiatives in local communities, and Ava quickly became a prominent voice, organizing fundraisers, and writing op-eds for the campus paper. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader. Back at home, Tamara worked tirelessly on her memoir, tentatively titled Stripped But Not Silenced: A Journey of Justice and Resilience. The writing process was cathartic, but emotionally taxing. Each chapter brought her back to moments of fear and anger, but also to moments of strength and solidarity. One late evening, she paused at a particularly challenging section, the chapter recounting Ava's humiliation. Tamara stared at the blinking cursor, her hands trembling. She closed her laptop and stepped outside into the cool night air. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ava. "Mom, remember, our pain is our power. You've taught me that." Taking a deep breath, Tamara returned to her desk. She typed until dawn, pouring every ounce of truth into her words. By morning, the draft was complete. Months later, the book was published to critical acclaim. Tamara's raw honesty and unwavering call for systemic change sparked nationwide conversations. She was invited to speak at universities, community centers, and legislative hearings. Each appearance amplified her voice and reinforced the legacy she and Ava had begun. At the David Johnson Center for Community Unity, Franklin Harper was now a familiar figure. Once a symbol of abuse, he had transformed into a mentor for those who had faced the system's failures. His days were filled with tutoring sessions, restorative justice meetings, and public speaking engagements at schools and correctional facilities. During one such event, Harper addressed a group of teenagers who had been labeled at risk. His words were stripped of pretense, filled instead with vulnerability. "I'm not here to justify what I did," he told them, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm here to tell you that change is possible. I'm living proof that accountability and growth can coexist." One of the teens raised a hand. "How do you know people will ever trust you again?" Harper paused, considering the question. "I don't," he admitted. "But trust isn't given. It's earned, one action at a time." The teen nodded, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. Later, he approached Harper to thank him, marking another small victory in Harper's journey toward redemption. The town itself had become a model for reform. The police department, now under Chief Sarah Martinez, had implemented Tamara's proposed reforms with tangible results. Complaints of misconduct had dropped significantly, and community trust was steadily rebuilding. At the community's first Unity Day, officers and residents worked side by side, planting trees in the local park. The symbolism was clear. They were planting seeds for a better future. Tamara and Ava joined the event, their presence a reminder of how far the town had come. Tamara helped paint a mural on the side of the community center, while Ava spoke to a group of teens about turning adversity into action. "We're not just fixing the system," Ava told them. "We're creating something entirely new." Months later, Ava found herself on stage at a national summit on youth advocacy and reform. The room, filled with policymakers, activists, and community leaders, buzzed with anticipation as she approached the microphone. "My story is not unique," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's the story of thousands of children who've faced systemic prejudice. But it's also the story of what happens when we refuse to stay silent." Her speech was met with thunderous applause, and by the end of the day, she had received invitations to collaborate with organizations nationwide. Ava's vision was no longer confined to her hometown. It was spreading across the country. Back in the town, Harper sat in a small, dimly lit room at the community center, penning another letter to Ava. This one wasn't an apology, but a note of gratitude. "Dear Ava, Your strength has taught me what true courage looks like. Thank you for giving me the chance to change, even when I didn't deserve it. I will carry that lesson with me every day." At the same time, Ava sat in her dorm room, drafting a speech for her next summit. She paused to read the letter Harper had sent months ago, now framed on her desk. It was a reminder of how far they had both come. When Ava returned home for the summer, she and Tamara attended a town meeting to celebrate the one-year anniversary of the Police Accountability and Reform Act. As Ava took the stage to speak, she looked out at the faces of her community. Her mother, Harper, Ms. Williams, and so many others who had been part of her journey. "We are proof that change is possible," she said. "But our work isn't done. Change doesn't end. It evolves. And together, we will keep moving forward." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the town square. For the first time, Ava felt the full weight of her legacy, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the town, Ava and Tamara stood side by side, watching their community thrive. They had turned their pain into power, their struggle into progress, and though the journey was far from over, they faced it with hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of unity. As Ava's journey shows us, even in the darkest moments, there's a spark of hope that can ignite a movement for change. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced an injustice that changed your perspective? We'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And if this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of resilience, courage, and transformation. Together, let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next story.